are live.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Metro Schools Budget and Finance Committee on May 12th. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Dr. Severe to call the roll.
Pardon, we were working at a technical difficulty there. Dr. Gentry?
I'm here.
Dr. Gentry's present. Ms. Elrod?
Present.
Ms. Elrod's present. Ms. Spearing?
Present.
Ms. Spearing's present. Ms. Shepard?
Here.
Shepard's present. Ms. Buggs?
Present.
Ms. Buggs is present. Ms. Bush?
Present.
Ms. Bush is present. Ms. Player Peters?
Present.
Ms. Player Peters is present. Ms. Frog?
I'm here.
Ms. Frog's present. Ms. Pooper-Walker?
Here.
Ms. Pooper-Walker's present. Madam Chair, you have 9 present.
Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to thank all of our viewers out there. I know there's a lot of folks that are very focused on this budget and finance process this year, perhaps more than any other year. And I just want to stop and acknowledge that this has been a really extraordinarily difficult year for so many folks in our community, starting with tornadoes and then with coronavirus and all of the complications related to schools out of session, people losing work, financial insecurity. And I know that Dr. Battle and her team have done everything they can to mitigate sort of the impacts as much as possible. But I think one of our biggest challenges going forward clearly is going to be addressing the budget shortfall that the city has in terms of revenue. And so the meeting today is really just an update on where we are, what we're considering, what trade-offs we're considering making. If I could get everybody to mute their phones, mute their computers when they are not talking, that'd be great. I know that there are lots of questions out there still about budgets that Metro Council will eventually pass and agree to. So a lot of conversations. I know Dr. Battle has been in close conversations with the mayor's office. We have been in conversations with Councilman Mendez, and so appreciate all of the collaboration across city leaders. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton over to Dr. Battle and Mr. Henson to walk us through sort of a status update on where we are.
Madam Chair, this is David Severe. I don't know that Dr. Battle, we've had some struggles getting her in on this meeting. So we're working on through that right now. So Dr. Battle, are you in?
Can she call in? What do you think?
We can certainly go that route. Can we? If we can just all stand down for just a second. Let me see if I can get her in because I want to make sure she's looped in on this for sure.
Okay, we'll just hang out for a second.
Okay, I'm joining now. Yeah.
All right, welcome, Dr. Battle. I'm going to pass the floor over to you and Mr. Henson at this time.
Thank you so much, and I apologize for that delay. Give me just a second. I will get queued up here. All right, thank you again, and greetings, board members. I wanted to give you a brief update prior to the presentation from Kerrs Henson on where we stand with the budget for FY 2020-21. We understand the financial position that Metro government and all of us are facing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the shutdown of our economic engine. Working with our MNPS finance team and human resources, we found some significant cuts that can be made from the budget to plug the deficit between two numbers. The budget number identified by Metro Finance as a state minimum, required maintenance of effort budget, and the budget we truly need to maintain the status quo of operations at MNPS. Those cuts include a reorganization of our central office that will save $1 million.
Okay, groovy. All right, great. Thanks. Great. Bye.
improve lines of communication and chains of command, and restore our district's efforts to promote equity and diversity. We'll also be able to reduce about $3.5 million through consolidations of under-enrolled schools and the closure of the Cone School, which would allow us to focus our attention and resources in a way that will improve student outcomes if approved by the board. We've identified our budget reductions or transfers that will in total result in a $10 million reduction in either spending or future expenditures to get us closer to a balanced budget with a $915 million metro allocation. That still leaves us with $15 million left to find in savings or cuts. I want to say that we've been working with the mayor's office to try and realize those additional revenues to fully fund our budget needs, and I know Mayor Cooper really wants to see that happen. We thought we might be able to use savings from this year to offset costs in next year's budget, but after conversations with Metro Finance yesterday, we have not been able to find a solution to close the gap just yet. Eliminating the COLA isn't an option that we're prepared to consider, so we'll have to find those savings in other areas. Let's be clear, we long ago moved past the fat in the MNPS budget and deep into the meat, and we're getting closer to the bone. We should prepare ourselves for the reality that if we need to reduce our budget by another $15 million on top of the $10 million we're proposing today, cuts will likely impact school budgets if we don't get the revenue necessary to offset the costs. The board will have to decide if we ask the Metro Council to help us find the additional revenue and the budget necessary to make us whole. In the meantime, we can continue working to identify the least impactful budget cuts, savings, reductions, or efficiencies possible over the next few weeks before we are required to adopt a final budget after the Metro Council passes theirs. If the board decides to adopt an initial MNPS budget proposal that matches the funding level in the current Metro budget proposal, we will need to cut departments and school budgets across the board. As always, we want to provide you with the best information and guidance possible in making your decision, and we are willing to explore any options or proposals from this board on how we can best craft a balanced budget while still supporting students, staff, and families and improving academic outcomes for all. At this time, I am going to kick it over to Kerrs Henson, our Chief Operations Officer, to walk us through our presentation for this committee meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Battle. I'll ask Jamal if you could please pull up the slide deck. Thank you, and go to the next slide, please. So we wanted to show this slide again. This was shared with you at the previous Budget and Finance Committee meeting, but we want to be sure there's a full understanding of where we began and how we got to where we are today. As you remember, our original current year budget was $914.5 million. Then we amended that budget to increase it by, as you can see, by approximately between $7 and $8 million for the mid-year 3% cost of living adjustment that was provided to employees back in January, excuse me. This was approved through the mayor's office as well as through the Metro Council. This did require Metro Council approval to increase our funding allocation to this $922 million level to give that mid-year 3% cost of living adjustment to employees in January, and that additional funding came from our own fund balance. And so we funded the half year of the mid-year 3% cost of living adjustment that was provided to employees in January with our fund balance. This year, the proposed budget that has been filed is a $914.9 million budget, which does require us to consider cuts and budget reductions to offset those increases. These expenditure increases that we have moving from one year to the next have been discussed for the last several months, beginning with Dr. Battle's community budget meetings that were held back in February, as well as being included on the district's website and other areas. You go to the next slide, please. And so this one is a little harder to see. If there's a way, Jamal, you can increase the size just a little bit. This is a slide that was shared also at the previous Budget and Finance Committee meeting to show as we move forward, thank you, as we move forward from one year to the next, what those required additional expenditures would be. At the top part of the page, we have employee compensation, and we will be looking at these in a little more detail for the next two slides. And then the bottom part of the page would be other required additions, again, just moving from one year to the next at the same level of service. Over on the left side of the page, we do have some reference information as it relates to how much does a step increase cost and how much does a 1% cost of living adjustment cost for both our certificated employees as well as our support employees. And if you put those together, a step increase for all employees costs approximately $8.2 million, and a 1% cost of living adjustment or raise for all employees costs approximately $6 million. So if you'll go to the next slide, please, and we will look at the next slide just at the top part of this page, which is the compensation part of it. And again, this is in the same format that you're familiar with. We have, for compensation, we have insurance increases for both our certificated employees and our support employees. As a reminder, the district pays 75% of the premium and the employee pays 25%, the same as Metro government. The Employee Insurance Trust voted on a 4.6% increase for our certificated employees insurance, and our 75% of that premium cost increase is approximately $3.8 million. And then the Metro Employee Benefit Board governs our support employee benefits. They are treated as Metro government employees for benefit purposes. And the Employee Benefit Board voted on an average 6% increase in the insurance premium, where there was a cost of $1.7 million for the district as our 75% of that premium. We also have here the continuation of the current year mid-year 3% COLA, which again was funded this year by our undesignated fund balance, a half a year at about $7.5 million. A full year is about $15.1 million. And so if you look, there are some corresponding decreases as it relates to a reduction in the state pension rate, as well as what we have typically estimated as our savings on the front end from vacancy and turnover that would occur throughout the year. But you can see with just the employee compensation, there's an additional cost of approximately $16.7 million. Again, over $15 million of that is just continuing what we have already provided as a mid-year 3% cost of living adjustment for it to continue to be funded next year. If you'll go to the next slide, please. So the next slide details what we have, a lot of what we've been saying for the last several months, the additions that are required to move the district forward at the same level of service. We have some IT costs as it relates to network upgrades, antivirus, software, and continuation of support for the R12 program. We also have, as we've discussed in previous years, the continuation of those 22 pre-K classrooms that previously were funded from the federal pre-K expansion grant. We funded half of that out of local funding for this year because the grant ended back on December 31st. And so we would need to fund the second half of that for next year with an estimated cost of approximately $1.6 million. We've included the increase as it relates to our projected enrollment increases in our English learner students. Projection for our English learner students would require an additional 20 EL teaching positions. And just to maintain the same student-based budgeting weighted student formula, providing that additional weight for our English learner students has a cost of $1.2 million. Skipping over some of the smaller ones, I'll just touch on some of the larger ones. We do have an increase in our Metro IT internal service fee of about $700,000. We have a decrease in our career ladder, which is flow-through funding from the state because the program is now closed. Therefore, there are no new teachers that are career ladder certified, so this number will continue to decrease over time, but there's a corresponding decrease of $300,000 on the revenue side since this is state flow-through money. We are reflecting the $500,000 in savings from our new custodial and grounds contract. We are also estimating our Metro water rate increase. Actually, this number was provided to us by Metro Water, an increase of $1.1 million. We do have a decrease in our MDHA property tax refund of approximately $5.3 million, which is reflected here. We also have an increase in our student-based budgeting allocation relating to enrollment increases in our traditional schools that follow the student-based budgeting formula. And then we're reflecting the estimated savings from the consolidation of Graymar into Jerry Baxter at a savings of approximately $440,000. Our estimate of our charter school increase mainly based upon enrollment increases for those charters that continue to add additional grades each year at approximately $6.5 to $6.6 million. So our total other required additions, you can see, is approximately $8.3 million. So we have a total additions of doing all of the things on this page, moving forward from one year to the next at the same level of service at approximately $25 million. With the recommended funding level from the mayor, with his budget being filed with the council at $914.9 million, would require us to reduce our budget by approximately $24.6 million. If you'll go to the next slide, please. So as Dr. Battle indicated, we began to look at where could we, where might we achieve savings or budget reductions moving forward. And so we're looking at all sources of funding. And so one of the places that we looked at, particularly on a short-term or one-year basis, was, are there areas where we can transfer expenditures from our operating budget over to our capital funding? Realizing that in many ways this is robbing Peter to pay Paul, because we need as much capital funding as we can get. But looking at what we're being asked to do as far as our operating budget, we have identified some expenditures that for 1 year can be capitalized as opposed to being included in the operating budget. The IT operating expenditures to capital at $820,000, and then maintenance operating expenditures transferred over to capital funding at $1.5 million. We're also looking at potential savings in waste disposal by reducing the number of pickups at schools. Of course, we don't want any kind of situation where there's an overflow, but we're looking in all areas. And then, as you just discussed during your teaching and learning committee meeting, there are four other school consolidations on this list. And we'll touch on those briefly, knowing that you just discussed them at your committee meeting, and then you will also be discussing them at the board meeting at 5 o'clock. The consolidation, or actually the closing of Lillard and consolidating into Cumberland and Alex Green, the estimated savings is $770,000. The closing of Joelton, consolidating into Haynes, the savings $643,000. The closing of Buena Vista, consolidating into Jones, a savings of $810,000, and then the closing of Cone and those students going to their zoned high school, a savings of almost $1.1 million. We also looked at a pool of money that we include in the student-based budgeting pool for what we call exception hires, approximately $3 million. This would be a pool where we have a staffing committee that's represented by human resources, exceptional education, English learners, et cetera, that look at schools' request for exception hires for positions that they can't necessarily afford with their student-based budgets. We are proposing to consider reducing that by $3 million, and so there would be very few exception hires, and schools would be required to have a budget based upon the weighted student funding formula. We are proposing a reorganization of the central office, and Dr. Battle may want to speak more to this later, at a savings of approximately $1 million, and then reflecting the energy savings that we feel can be achieved from the school consolidations and closures of approximately $180,000. All of that adds up to a little over $10 million in reductions. And again, this just reiterates some of what Dr. Battle indicated earlier. If we were to do these things and be able to save $10 million, you can see down at the bottom, we would still be $14.5 million short in our cuts or reductions to meet the recommended budget that's been filed with the council. So if you'll go to the next slide, please. So just as a reminder, how the funding gets to schools, we have approximately $770 million to work with. The other dollars that you see come off the top, so the MDHA property tax flow, also the charter school payments, those come off the top. So we have approximately $770 million remaining for district-run schools. Approximately $250 million of that is district-provided services, things like utilities, custodial, transportation, maintenance, etc. And $520 million of that goes directly out to schools as part of schools' budget. And so you can see of $770 million that we have as a district to work with, how that's split up between district-provided services and sent directly out to schools. So if you'll go to the next slide. So if we did have to make an additional $15 million in budget reductions in addition to the $10 million that we just discussed, one thing that we want to remind everyone is that we've continued to reduce our spending in such areas as contracted services, as well as district office expenses, travel, etc., to maintain a balanced budget in the past, and we have held school budgets harmless. We have not reduced any school budgets over the last 3 years where we have been making budget reductions as needed. $15 million in additional cuts would equate to a 2 to 3% cut across the district, which could mean if we were to look at, for instance, a 2% cut to the $250 million that are district provided services, and then a 2% reduction to the individual school budgets, that would equate to approximately $15 million in cuts. If we were to reduce the school budgets by 2%, that would equate to about a $10 million reduction, which according to our estimates at this point equate to an average $140 per pupil reduction in school budgets. As an example, a school with 400 students might see around a $61,000 reduction, which very likely would have to come from the elimination of a position at the school. Obviously, human resources would work to support placement of any staff if needed, if we had to go this route. So if you go to the next slide, please. The next slide just shows as a reminder, I know we've discussed this in the past and at our previous committee meeting, what that $250 million in centralized or district provided services are. Fixed charges would be the largest portion of that. That would include retiree health insurance that the district continues to pay on behalf of our retirees, as well as several metro government charges that we receive. The next largest grouping would be transportation, and then we have utilities that the school district pays on behalf of schools. We don't require them to budget for their utilities the same. We don't require schools to budget for transportation. Next would be custodial and grounds, and then maintenance. And then you get into IT, where a lot or many of the staff members in IT spend the vast majority of their time out in schools, working with teachers to make sure that all of the technology is functioning properly. And then you can see it starts getting fairly small as we go down the list, and as you start getting into some of the district departments, where many of those expenditures are on behalf of schools as well. You'll go to the next slide, please. And then regarding Kerrs funding, and Hank Clay may want to weigh in on this if there are specific questions. The district did expect to receive around $26 million. Some of that will be required to be distributed to our non-public schools that participate in title funding. We also want to be sure that everyone understands that these funds will be needed for the reopening of schools and for the preparation for continued remote or distance learning if necessary when schools start back in August. We are still waiting on guidance, and there is an application process from the Tennessee Department of Education. We have not seen that application yet, but there is an application process required where the Tennessee Department of Education will approve the spending of how these Kerrs funds will be spent. And so it's not as if it's money that comes into our operating budget and that we can spend freely from it. These funds will be coming into our federal programs and grants fund, and as indicated, there will be an application process with the State Department of Education. And also just to point out that there are additional federal funds that have been awarded to the city, of course, under the mayor's office, as well as the state through the governor's office, and also to the State Department of Education. And with that, I think the next slide is a questions slide. I'll turn it back over to Dr. Battle if she wants to add anything that I missed, or to Ms. Pupo Walker. Thank you.
Dr. Battle, did you want to add anything here, or do you want me to start with questions?
No, ma'am, Madam Chair. I'll kick it over to you to facilitate any discussion with the board.
Okay, I'll see. Anybody have questions at this time?
I do. This is Frida Player.
Okay.
I've been getting questions, particularly about the Kerrs Fund, and there's an assumption that the Kerrs Fund, the 26 million, that it will go into fiscal year 21, and so I guess how much it would be accounted to fiscal year 21, how much would be accounted for fiscal year 20. I think there's confusion because there has been an assumption that that $26 million is going to make up the $25 million whole. And so I'd like to clarify that assumption.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Frida Peters. There would be about 20% that could be allocated to fiscal year 20, our current fiscal year, and then the rest would need to be used in the next fiscal year. We just received additional guidance that might be able to be used in the following fiscal year after that as well, which will be good to have additional flexibility in case, so we can spend every single penny of that. But as Mr. Henson already indicated, this will need to be allocated to new remote learning or returning back in a new COVID environment. And those are all expensive propositions. And so it shouldn't be seen as a replacement to our operating budget.
Okay. And then a portion of that amount, so it's safe to the 26 million that goes to non-public schools, is that private and charter schools, or what are the non-public schools, and how much of that 26 million do they get a part of that? So I guess it also is assumptions made that 26 million is exclusively for MNPS schools and not for schools within Davidson County, whether they're public or private.
Those are for schools within Davidson County, and so that term non-public schools is a federal term that they use to describe schools that serve the federal regulation of kids living in poverty. And some of the title funds follow those kids regardless of whether they're in a public school or non-public school. Separate from that, charter schools are considered public schools in this line of thinking, and are public schools. And so they would be taking, that we need to get additional guidance from the state on how we would allocate those funds. And so we do not know yet how much of the 26 million that would be, but it could be a sizable amount.
Okay, so right now we're still waiting to hear back. That $26 million has been allocated to the entire jurisdiction of Davidson County. We're only getting a portion of that 26 million for MNPS schools, exclusively traditional and charter schools included in that. Is that correct?
That's correct. It'll flow through MNPS functionally and then be distributed based on the guidance that they provide us, and have not yet.
Okay. I have one other question. Just for clarification. So for the certified insurance pool, certificated employees insurance pool, are they a self-insured pool within the state or within Metro government? I know they're not part of the Metro Government Benefit Board, but can there be clarification of how the certificated employees, how they're insured in their own pool, to clarify the increases in insurance?
Sure. Yes, that's accurate. The certificated employees' benefits are administered by the Employee Insurance Trust, and it is a self-insured plan with a separate fund called the Employee Insurance Trust Fund. And so it's a separate fund within Metro Schools and Metro government. It's a self-insured fund that's separate from the Metro Employee Benefit Board and established many, many years ago.
Okay. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
I want to just jump in and say, I want to be clear that, CARES Act money, stimulus money flows and is distributed as Title I is distributed in the same kind of formula. But private schools in Nashville have always received a chunk of Title I money. For many years, we have flowed money to them based on a particular formula, and they're meant to use it. And it's not much, but it is money that is sent to them that is meant to support students who, I can't remember exactly the designation. I think it's something to the effect of the school the catchment zone includes schools that would be Title I schools. So anyway, I just want you to know, Frida, there is money that will come out of this that will go to private schools. Do we have other questions?
I do have a couple of questions or comments.
Okay, Ms. Shepherd.
Mr. Henson, have you sent us this slide deck before?
Not this particular slide deck. We did go over a slide deck that was somewhat similar at our previous Budget and Finance Committee meeting, and I think Dr. Severe then sent that out, the whole slide deck out to all board members, I believe, which we can obviously do again with this. And then we also posted it, and we'll post this one to our website and the recording will be available.
Okay, I would appreciate that. And also, have we reallocated or repurposed, whatever the word is, any Title I funding from any of the schools in our district?
I'm not aware of anything like that. I'll let Hank step in though, because the federal programs fund falls under Hank.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Shepherd. You may be referring to, there was some discussion about using some Title I funding for summer school. And so there was some discussion about we just want to take advantage of every penny that we have and leave nothing on the table. And so that has not been pulled back, but there was some discussion about whether we could use schools' title budget to help with any enrichment we provide this summer.
Okay. So the $15 million that we're short, how do I say this politically correct? What would preclude us from just saying, we don't have it, we can't find it, looking to the mayor and the council to help us with that?
Well, it's a dance, and that's one of the steps of the dance. And so, that is a decision this board can make. We can say, it's 25 million we need to find, right? 15 of that is to honor the 6% COLA raise, right, that we offered this year to employees. And so we can certainly, make that be the next step. If that's the will of the board, to push it back onto the council and the mayor to say, we need your help in identifying this 15 million and we cannot find it in our own budget.
I personally do not have an appetite for rolling back a raise that was given in January of last year. I think that's a very poor move on our part. It's not a show of any kind of confidence level in any of those employees that we compensated an extra 3%. And I have always been a proponent of ask for what you need, not for what you think you can get.
Yep. Hey, Jeannie.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I called you by your first name. I've been trying to get
Oh,
in. Just a couple of questions. And this is probably for Chris, and I want to word this correctly. Does the dollars that we have as student-based budgeting, that those funds that go directly to the schools, does that reflect a fully staffed school? And the reason I'm asking the question is that I know that we have a lot of schools, especially in our priority states, that are not fully staffed, right? We have teachers that before the tornado or even now, right, didn't have all the teachers that they needed. But does the budget reflect them being fully staffed?
Their budgets do reflect the schools being fully staffed. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we do take into consideration on the front end potential vacancy and turnover during the year. And then we also, of course, know that when we have vacancies, that increases our substitute costs. But the short answer to your question is yes, the budgets for schools are based upon them being fully staffed.
Okay. And so you also mentioned on the slide that there would be additional dollars coming beyond the Kerrs, the 26 million, which I just want to be the one to say again, does not all come to MNPS district schools. That the additional dollars that would be flowing to the mayor's office, the governor's office, and additional TDOE dollars, are there applications for those additional funds as well? And what's the timing of that? And what fiscal year would those dollars fall into?
Dr. Gentry, I'd be glad to take a stab at that. So the city of Nashville received about $121 million for the effort to fight COVID. And those funds are a little bit more limited, both in time frame. So I believe that those are meant to be spent by December 31st in the current year, 2020. And the mayor's office has been very collaborative on how they might be able to spend that money. And in fact, met with Dr. Battle again about that today. In addition to that, the state as a whole received several billion dollars to use in fighting COVID. And I'm not exactly clear at this point, and I'm not sure the state is either, how they plan to spend that, whether they plan to distribute some to cities for their purposes. And then the TDOE money, they were permitted by federal law to retain 10% of the money that came in the CARES Act funding, like the 26 million we received. That happened to also total about 26 million, and they will be releasing grants on that. Then there's another pot of money that came for the purposes of education, both higher ed and K through 12 education, that went straight to the governor's discretion. And so that's yet another pot of money that they will likely distribute through grants. We have not received guidance on any of those about grants that we might be able to apply for, but we fully intend putting forward whatever good plans we have that would qualify.
Okay, that's all I have right now, Ms. Walker.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else? Going once?
I have a question.
Okay.
Again, I've been asked whether could the CARES Fund Act can be used to use for social distancing for the under-enrolled schools to prevent the consolidation. I guess that's an idea that's out there in the community about, could you use it to do that? I guess to help this in general, I guess the better question is, if we need to have school starts up in the fall, we need to be social distancing for students. Could CARE Fund be used for infrastructure for that? That's how I'm understanding the question.
Hank, you want to take that?
So CARES Act can be spent on ways to address coronavirus response. And I'm not sure the exact backing of your question, but if we're trying to spread children out to get further apart from each other, yes, I think that could be part of the planning. So for example, if we wanted to have classrooms to ensure that students were 6 feet apart from each other at all times, and ways that we might be able to use facilities or scheduling in different ways, I think all of that is on the table right now.
Okay.
And if I can add to that, I think, not understanding the full context of the question, but recognizing that if we did move in that direction, it would be a very limited approach, right? So you would have to be thinking about applying that across the district, which, and when you're thinking about our remote learning plan and the integrated approach that we've got to be thinking about to accelerate learning when school resumes, and the limited stretching dollars to meet the additional priorities of the board, we would be very limited in what could actually happen after we were able to social distance in that manner across just a very few select schools. I think we also have to keep in mind when we're thinking about our public health response and social distancing requirements that a lot of this is also dependent on the structure that we're in going into next school year. I know there's lots of thoughts about how the Kerrs dollars can be used, but a lot of that is also dependent on the structure that we're in, whether that be traditional, blended, or a full virtual setting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so I will just make a couple of closing remarks here. I think that if there was a tagline to go with this budget, it would be that we are honoring our commitments, right? And we are honoring our commitments to raises that we gave staff. We're honoring our commitments to maintaining pre-K seats. We're honoring our commitments to funding schools to support English learners. We are funding our commitment to schools being fully staffed and having what they need at their school level. And, you know, we have asked a lot of Dr. Battle and her team in terms of being creative and finding dollars wherever they can. But clearly we're still a long way to go if we are not able to cover that 15 million that is for the COLA increase. And so, you know, I think the conversation now needs to move towards, do we ask Dr. Battle and Mr. Henson and the team to find that 15 million, which it sounds like that would now mean going into school-based budgets, every principal having to cut 2 or 3% out of their budget, or do we put it back in toss the ball back into the court of counsel and hope that the budget negotiations that are going to occur fast and furious here in the coming several weeks will result in potentially us getting more money. So I'd like to just hear what folks might be thinking about the strategies there.
I have one more question. Sorry about that. So this $15 million that we still need to make, that still does not include the textbooks that we approved 2 weeks ago for English language arts that are going into next school year starting August. That is correct.
That is correct.
That's correct.
So that would mean we'll need ideally $27 million if we wanted to include funding the book for next year.
Correct.
Okay. I mean, I guess I'm still at the point I mean, textbooks are a very fundamental part of school. You literally cannot learn without textbooks. So I'm still kind of stuck on that part. And I understand Mr. Henson's, he's doing his job and, you know, just making the numbers in the budget work, but, and they have done a great job in this very tough situation. But for me, like, the legitimate hole that we're in is $25+ million, because besides the infrastructure and personnel parts, we still got to educate kids. Like, that's our primary goal, is to educate kids, and that we can't do the fundamental aspect of it to do. I think for myself, I would like to see us advocate to the council for more funding. And, you know, I'm looking into ways that we can do that and suggest we can do that. I believe that we should come, you know, to the table where we can find the extra funds and request council to get the extra funds for them. I know we can't tell them where to do it, and like, they can't tell us how to spend our money, but I think there's places where we can go and secure at least funding to help close this hole even more. But I think it's a collaborative effort, and I think we need to, you know, one thing a city does is educate their children. If we're still going to be a city that's equitable, you know, we have to look under every rock, and I don't think every rock has been looked at. And I know there are a lot of council members who are going through this and trying to find places to do it. And I know we're asking a lot of our constituents with the revenue increase, but I think it's something that we still need to start looking at places to look for more funds. But I think there's a portion that we have to go back to council and say we need more funding. As ideally, we know we cannot ask for the funding we thought of at March 10th, but we need a little bit more just to do our basic functions and to maintain that maintenance of effort. And there's a cost of living to the maintenance of effort. And I think that's what people are misunderstanding, that when you do this, that you can't just use the same funds without their cost of living doing. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I would reiterate my colleague's words. Our job is to educate the children of this city, and that has to be the basis for every decision that we make. Now, I'll remind us that we do have a meeting with Metro Council a week from this coming Thursday. And every year I encourage all of us to attend. Of course, this year I think it's going to be virtual, but still, I think we need to be in attendance. I think we need to have notes that say, okay, these dollars will go buy textbooks. These dollars will go fund the raise that we promised last year. These dollars will, and have earmarked dollars so that we just don't show up and say, okay, we need, $25 million. Well, why? Well, that's just what our budget holds. We need to be specific in our asks of them, because I think that personalizes it for so many council members who don't have the same mindset that we do, and not that they should. I'm just saying that that's what we were elected to do, and that's where our focus needs to be. And so I would encourage all of us, excuse me, to reach out to not just our specific council reps, but the entire council. I know that I'm going to say this. I think Bob Mendez probably gets a headache every time he talks to me because I ask him so many questions. But I want to be deliberate in my ask, and I want to be specific in my ask, and let them know textbooks are very important. Every one of us had a textbook in school. Our kids can't say that.
Okay, thank you so much. Anybody else?
I have a quick question, Madam Chair.
Yes, Ms. Bugs.
Do we know of any council members that are preparing? I mean, I'm so hopeful and excited that Councilman Mendez will, because he always puts forth a really helpful, supportive budget for us if we can ever get the votes. But are there other council members that are considering? I've had one in my district reach out and say that they might be. And then I only bring that up to say that if we know of someone that is, that, we can figure out how to support them and how to get the word out about what we need. This specific council member just asked for a PowerPoint that we've shown over the past 2 years. And it was really, really helpful. And it helped them be able to see and explain, kind of process through how they would market it to their colleagues and to the community. And I think that could just be really helpful if we have a coordinated effort. And this is the platform to talk about it, So how do we break this apart? Do we focus on a specific council member and their potential replacement budget? Do we focus on getting the PowerPoint out, or do we chew gum and walk, which I'm fine with?
Okay. I don't know of any other budgets right now, like specifically. I think there's talk that there are budgets cooking out there. Don't know yet.
And also, this is Frida. Also, the deadline to submit, I think the substitute budgets for preparation is today. So,
well, there you go.
So I think that's also part of it, but I think it's part of kind of walk and chew gum, where we have to do the education and advocate at the same time. So I'm more than willing to help with that, along with my colleagues.
Ms. Spearing?
Yes, thank you. My question is for David Williams. Do we know yet the cost to fund the ELA adoption?
Thank you, Ms. Spearing. Yes, this is David Williams. So it depends on which materials we get in terms of the consumables, for example, hard book, online versions, etc. If we got the consumable version at a 1-year cost for our 6 through 12 purchase with My Perspectives, that amount is $985,000. If we were to go with essentially the minimum, for elementary K-5. It's about $5 million, and that includes all the materials. So once we have those costs, we would be able to think about different implementation options. For example, the core text, we could do strictly read alouds in kindergarten or strictly read aloud in first grade, and that would save us some money. The price that I quoted for the 612 adoption would be recurring because that would be a consumable purchase. So that $985,000 that I mentioned would be a one-year cost, and we would have to pay that amount every single year for the next 6 years to fully fund those materials. So the elementary cost, again, is not recurring in the same way, because once you invest in the core text, for example, the teachers have those and they keep them in their classrooms, and they become part of the classroom library, and you don't have to repurchase those every year the same way you would for the other materials.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Elrod?
Thank you. So I want to make sure that I have the comment of, if we do go back to the mayor's office and to the council to say, we cannot find the money that we're being requested to find, that we need to still be prepared that they're not gonna budge. We can do that, as Jeannie has said, you know, if that's the will of the board, we can do that. But they also don't have to give it to us.
Correct.
And so we need to be prepared for that. Of course, we will monitor what potential budgets came back today and kind of what's that movement within the council. If we want additional funds, we're not going to be able to find those savings. We do need to, as a board, have a unified front as well on supporting the property tax requests, and that those, whatever is happening, we need to be aware of those conversations and be supportive of them as well, not only for our current budget, but our future budgets. To get additional funds means additional property tax increases. So we need to have not just a request, but also some solutions.
Thank you. Anybody else have a comment at this time? Okay. I appreciate all the thoughtful remarks and the preparation by Dr. Battle and Mr. Henson, and we will continue the conversation. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of the Metro's Council budget proposals today, and we will stay in touch. And so with that, I will go ahead and conclude the meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Unknown participant is now exiting.